Hello and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Managing Madrid podcast. Today was primarily supposed to be a loan tracker, and we'll still talk about the loanees, but that takes a backseat to today's sad news that Real Madrid legend and just a very incredible human being, Paco Gento, passed away. And we would like to offer a few words. I know Matt, who's also on the podcast tonight, we have watched many Gento games. We've talked about many Gento games. We have done deep dives on his legacy and his, just his greatness as a player. And there's just so much to say. I mean, Florentino Perez said today that he was 4 years old when he went to his first Real Madrid game. And Gento was part of the reason why he was a Real Madrid fan in the first place. And in a similar way, he had that same effect on me, but decades before I was born, because of him, in some ways, I'm a Real Madrid fan, because my dad's first Real Madrid game that he ever watched, he was watching on a small black and white TV in Iran. It was the 1966 European final, and that was, towards the twilight of Gento's career, but he was leading the Yeyes to a European Cup victory over Partizan Belgrade, and Real Madrid won that game, and since then my dad has been a Madridista. And decades later, I was born, and I was a Madridista because of my dad. So I owe a lot to Gento, but yeah, I just wanted to really say that he's the last of an era that was still with us, and it's almost like the chapter closed. So, Matt, your initial thoughts to hearing the news today, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I saw it when I woke up this morning and I was shocked. And honestly, this one impacted me a little bit more just because of the historical segment, honestly, because we had watched him play, we had done our research kind of on those eras, and especially during COVID, we did so much of that. We watched so many historical games, and I really felt like I got a deep dive into Real Madrid history. And so to see the type of player he was, to see it was so apparent in those games how good he was, how frightening his speed was, just his technical ability that would even be held in high regard today. All these things that you just think to yourself, wow, man, what a player. And it's fair to put that out as an argument. And when you were talking there, I was kind of thinking to myself, these guys, a lot of them, Florentino Perez became a fan because of that era and because of players like Gento, your dad, and so many others. And Real Madrid is what it is today because of those guys. None of us, there is no Florentino Perez, there is no Cristiano Ronaldo, Gareth Bale, the Galacticos, all these different types and phases of Real Madrid. It wouldn't be what it is today without those players, the Puskas, the Di Stefanos, the Gentos, who really started it all. And so it's definitely and I think I really felt like you saw it across with Real Madrid fans and Real Madrid channels today. I felt like it really impacted everyone.
Yeah, it's funny because with Di Stefano and Puskás, they died before I did a deep dive on their lives. So I think the impact was less with them. Puskás died in 2006, and I was just, at that time, I was 16. And so I didn't know that much about him. Di Stefano died during, I think he had just seen the Decima. So that was, I remember that very vividly because he passed away after La Decima. And obviously, that was a very memorable moment, and I remember that very vividly because he's, especially then, he was considered the greatest player in club history. But, it wasn't until years later I went and really, really did a deep dive on his life, researched him, read an entire book about him that was written fantastically by Ian Hawkeye, who followed him around, spoke to him in his later years, and put out some really interesting stuff about him. And so my connection with those two really deepened after they passed. But with Gento, I had that deep dive with him And that's why I think it hit me harder today when I saw the news, because, and especially when you look at old pictures, then you start to see the compilations that not only Real Madrid put out, but I also saw one on YouTube that was fantastic. I think Lucas posted on his Twitter. I think Luis Calle is a gentleman who puts out fantastic Real Madrid comps out there. And those ones were, and it's always when you see those compilations that you really go, wow, it really hits you then. But as a player, Matt, he's an incredible player. Like I said this that on Twitter, and I've said this I think before, that he was so ahead of his time. Like I think part of the reason why a player like Gento is so great and others of that era, there are like 4 or 5 players you watch from that era, their highlights now, and you're like, oh my god, it's like as if I'm watching something from 2020. Gento was like that. Garrincha was like that. Pele was like that. Di Stefano was like that. Puskás was like that. It's like they're legends in their era because they're ahead of their time. I think it's going to be the same way when we look back 50 years from now, when we see like Messi or Ronaldo highlights, and we'll probably be like, wow, these guys you could airdrop these guys now and they'd be fine. So that's part of like why Gento was so great. On top of Matt, like none of us need to really list all the accolades. We all know, like it's probably devoured the internet by now. He's won every trophy imaginable. It wasn't until recently when Marcelo tied him as the most decorated player in Real Madrid history. So like we know that side of things. But do you want to talk about like his player profile, like and kind of his role in that dynasty in the 50s?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny that he like in terms of player parallel, and they wear the same number or did wear the same number at Real Madrid. He reminds me a lot of Gareth Bale. Like just he was so unbelievably fast, and even I think Eduardo Alvarez posted a video today, and like and he commented at the end of it like he was 36, and you see Gento come flying through to score a goal, and his speed is still so electric at 36 years old. And even then, they didn't have the sports science we have now, so it's even more impressive. And when you watch him, like there's just countless videos and countless games where his speed is just breathtaking. Like that was one of his main assets. But more than that, and he played on the left wing. He was pure left footer. But more than that, he just had a ferocious shot. Like he was able to not only was he so fast, but he could stop and like change, really agile. Like he could change directions pretty quickly, and so it would leave defenders on their heels. And honestly, I think I mentioned it before, his technique, like his touch, everything was phenomenal. Like he wasn't just a speed merchant. He had it all, and he was really a weapon down that left wing. And I saw a great quote. Apparently, Alfredo Di Stefano in the Champions League, I think it was the third Champions League, or not, sorry, European Cup. Forgetting the game, but it went to extra time, and Alfredo Di Stefano goes up to Gento before extra time and tells him, Paquito, you are the one that has to get us out of this. You're the one that has to win this. And sure enough, they win it, and Gento was a huge part of it.
Like you mentioned so many things that I want to almost explore further, but like the fact that the whole thing where that clip, which is on Eduardo Alvarez's Twitter, where he flies in the box and scores at the age of 36. I mean, you look at the way a lot of those guys age. Even Puskás like had his peak after 30. You know, he signed for Real Madrid at 31, went on to have so many trophies with Real Madrid and scored so many times. And Puskás was the same. And you almost wonder, like, if they came up now with our sports science, I feel like they would just be, I mean, in a way, they'd be bigger legends, I think, because people would just know about them more. Like, their legacies would get even bigger, right? I think, like, I don't know if you saw, the Di Stefano had a lot of great quotes. I mean, also famously, Santiago Bernabeu actually wanted to sell them at one point, very early on in their careers. And Di Stefano was like, you can't, this guy has physical abilities that I've never seen before. I've never seen someone shoot the way he does with that much venom. You just can't. He's too unique. And part of the reason Bernabeu wanted to sell him was because of maybe some of his decision making and stuff. And Di Stefano was like, "We'll teach him. We'll teach him that stuff. You can't teach the stuff he has." Like,
Yeah, that was in Ian Hawkeye's book, right? I read that one too after you recommended it, and yeah, what I remember from that was um, Gento came to Real Madrid at a really young age. Like I think he was still a teenager, and he came from Santander, which is just a small kind of beach town in the north of Spain, and so it took him a while to adapt, and so that first year really didn't go that well. But Di Stefano, and that's why Santiago Bernabeu was thinking about selling him. But Di Stefano stepped in and said, "No way, you can't sell this guy."
well, like speaking of quotes and stuff, I don't know if you saw, there was one in El País there where it was an anecdote from Gento himself, where there was one game where he wasn't playing and he was sitting in the stands at the game, and next to him was a kid. And so on the field, there was another Real Madrid playing wearing number 11. So back then, they just, like, the fans just saw number 11 and were like, okay, that's Gento, right? And Gento wasn't playing. And I guess whoever was playing 11 that day was just having a terrible game. And the kid is shouting and saying, Gento sucks, and, like, get this guy off the field. He can't do anything. He's too predictable. He does the same thing over and over again. You need to sell him. And Gento was saying that he was sitting next to the kid. And he didn't say a word, and it broke him because people were, like, heckling him, and it wasn't him. And he felt really badly about it. And it just kind of took my mind to, like, wow, man, the Bernabeu has always just been ruthless. I guess back then it was the Chamartin, but
I can't believe. I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's not like they could replicate tons of jerseys and stuff, but just crazy that they didn't even switch number, and not everyone had their own numbers.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking about a very, very long time ago.
Yeah.
It's funny because just going through I have so many documents of Gento notes, not only for the historical games we did, but also just that I've gone back and watched other games for my book. He is one of those, like, players that, and I saw someone comment on this on my Twitter, actually, when I said he was ahead of his time, and someone replied and said, I saw in a compilation today that he did a Rabona, and he said, I thought Rabonos were only invented recently. I didn't know Gento was doing them in the 50s. And there was a lot like that. There's a lot of, like, if you go back and watch his games, like there were times, don't get me wrong, where, like, he was a little bit superfluous, with the ball, especially, like, places where maybe he shouldn't have been dribbling deep. But he was just such an incredible line breaker, dribbler, great passer. His movement was great. He's just doing these insane flicks and tricks as if it's 2020, flicking the ball over people's heads, just burning people, murdering people in broad daylight. I mean, he's just so ahead of his time and so fun to watch. And again, like, this is just by all accounts, everyone loved him, very beloved figure. This is we're not talking about just the footballer. We're talking about the man, like, the story from his family that was released, that he was actually wearing a Real Madrid jersey when they found him. And apparently this is something he just does. He wears a Real Madrid jersey or a Real Madrid shirt to bed. So in a lot of ways, he was just synonymous with the club itself.
Yeah, I love that story that his family shared, and I think that's just incredible. And just the outpouring, like, from all Real Madrid players, past and present. There were so many. Many I was actually surprised by. That just everybody wanted to make sure that they had send out their message and their well wishes and celebration of his life. And so I thought that was really cool and nice to see.
It's just so weird how things happen. I mean, like, yesterday on Twitter, Sergio Villarino, which some people on the podcast may know, and he's a big Real Madrid history buff, he had posted his Real Madrid all-time 11. And he had Gento in the starting lineup, and him and I just did a quick back and forth talking about that. And I said, I think I would have Puskás over Gento, and he said he'd have Gento, and I was like, that's fine. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer in this because some of it's subjective, and they're both incredible players. But then the next morning, I wake up and Gento's Gento's gone, and it's like it's just so weird how some of this
And
stuff
just the
happens.
yeah, the coincidence, like the first thing, one of the first things that ran through my mind too was like the fact that it literally happened a day or two after Marcelo
Mm.
matches him on the all-time trophy list. It was just kind of weird because like everyone was already talking about him then because of Marcelo's feat and because they had matched each other. And so it was just kind of weird.
In some ways, it's the timing works out in that way. You know,
Yeah.
it's like you're
Passing of the
passing the
baton.
torch. I mean, I felt that way almost about when Di Stefano passed after La Decima.
Yeah.
He got to see it,
Yeah.
and you know, and that was special.